It's always a pleasure to be here. See so many friends and people I have known for many years. And what I'm going to try and do this year is tell you a little bit about what's going on in terms of, if I can make this work, of course. What's going on in terms of new ways that we can use to improve the life of people with epilepsy. To some extent, this will be a double act. I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and this will be followed by my colleague, Sanjay Sisodia, who will give you an update on what's going on the genomic world, which I think it's one of the most important developments we're having in medicine. This is going to lead us to a major change in the paradigm. But I'm going to concentrate on some more mundane things, not, the sort of things that we will hear from Sanjay. I will talk about some very interesting developments that, the way that we see health. And this is the role of microbes, germs, that we, for many years, have been sort of trying to keep them away. But nowadays, there is a realization that they are part of our own environment, and they have a role to play. And I actually remember many, many years ago when I was starting epilepsy, some parents, some people would come and tell me that, how their guts would influence their seizures. And at the time I said, oh God, this is really nonsense. But now looking back, I think that they were right, and we should have listened to this much earlier. I'm going to mention a little bit about artificial intelligence and how using mathematics to look for patterns will lead to changes in the way we do medicine. And in the future, bioinformaticians will be a very important part of the delivery of health. And indeed, often when I talk to young people that want to follow a career in health, I say, remember bioinformatician role, and if you like mathematics, this should be something to consider. I'm going to mention very, very briefly about precision treatments, and this is in terms of drugs, delivery, and also surgery. And then my very last bit will be to mention some upcoming drugs. And I will say something about CBD, because I know that this is something a lot of people have been talking. Some people have been, to some extent, disappointed with what's going on at the moment. And I will try to put our position on this. So let's start by telling you a very mundane subject, which is the role of the germs, microbes. And there is a lot coming out now of the role that microbes are playing. And for instance, this Porphyromonas gingivalis seems to be quite a culprit for a number of diseases. And more evidence is coming that the role that this plays in Alzheimer's, Parkinson, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis. And there's some evidence that this could be also playing a role in epilepsy. It's interesting to see that this is actually a germ that likes iron. And there's some other parallel things coming and showing that the release of iron in the brain could be part of and parcel of the problems causing Alzheimer's and Parkinson. So this is really an interesting development, and we're going to hear more and more about this. And I think that we're also going to hear a lot, not just of the germs from the mouth, but germs from the guts. And this is the microbiota. The microbiota is all the guts we have, all the germs we have in our guts. And, in the guts we have, of course, we all know that there are germs there. But they will be playing a role because we have good guys and we have bad guys. And we need to understand the role of these and the role they play in health. And there is evidence coming that they play actually a central role. And there might be modifications in the future on diet. There might be ways that we change the microbes we have, and this could lead to improvement. But this is really starting, and this is something that we need to put a lot of efforts to try to understand. And research in this area is starting to trend. And as CBD was on some parts 5-6 years ago, this is now in many parts of the social media. People are starting to talk and talk about this. Now, I think that what we need to remember is that the type of microbes we will have in our gut, they are often due to the diet we have. So a sort of Western or maybe not so good diet will cause the intestine to degrade mucus. And mucus is very important for the maintenance of the health of the gut. When that breaks down, there's a release of a number of chemical signals. There might be some substance release that will, through the blood system, reach the brain and send wrong signals. A prudent diet, or let's call it, people call it all sorts of things, probably it's different because it will enhance the production of mucus, the right type of things, that will enhance the nice, friendly bacteria, microbes, and this will lead to better messages to the brain. And I think that if we were to do interventions, there need to be much more studies. There need to be trials for us to understand, what's the proper composition. And because we all have a different genome, as you will hear later, there might be things that are very individual. So we cannot at this time say that this will work and how it will work for everyone. But it's something very, very important for us to follow. And there is research efforts going into this. Now, I think that just to emphasize that if we have a healthy life, means that we having sort of healthy CNS, a normal gut physiology because we have the right germs there, we're going to probably, lead to an improvement. And this goes back and forth, sends signals both ways. But if we have stress and disease, that might itself send messages down. And the message may go both ways. And this will lead to probably disease. And this biosis basically means we're having wrong germs in our guts. And these will be sending wrong signs up to the brain, and this may cause problems. And there is preliminary evidence coming. And something I don't want to mention here, but it's a trending subject in many areas, particularly for intestine and sort of disease, is what is called, let's put it, FMT. That stands for fecal transfer. So you find someone, and there are companies doing this now, they're purifying, the F word, and they get it the right germs. They will then purify these germs, and these are transplanted. And there are trials sponsored by major grantee, like research funders in the United States, for instance. This is an American trial that is actually looking at the use of fecal matter transfer as a treatment for epilepsy. And we're having, for instance, reports of people that have epilepsy and Crohn's disease, which often go together. And this may explain why people with epilepsy are more prone to have autoimmune disease. So there are reports of people that have autoimmune disease, and they get treatment. For instance, if it's from the intestine, from the guts, their epilepsy improves. And there's been a number of reports of this. So I think that this is something that we need to sort of watch and see what's going on. There is other preliminary evidence coming that people with drug-resistant epilepsy, they will have a different composition on the sort of the makeup of the guts and bacteria than people that have drug-sensitive epilepsy. And this is very interesting, but it doesn't mean to say that we should be jumping at this. We need to understand food, we need to know the role of everything, and we need, more importantly, to know how this will apply to every person. And the development and the genetic front will help us with this, because things never go alone. They will actually be a sequence of things. So there have been studies, for instance, where people were given antibiotics to kill the bad guys and improve the number of right bacteria. And that seemed to have worked in short periods. But if you stop the antibiotic use, then, things went back to square one after a few weeks. So this is really, let's say, one pointer that we should be looking at this. But it's very important to remember that we don't really know which antibiotics for which microbes for everyone. We need to remember there are interactions between drugs and antibiotics, and we need to do this properly. We don't want people to go out there and start taking antibiotics just because someone said that this could work. I think that it's a lot of hope that this will provide another avenue for treatment. And, but we need to still look into this. There is evidence out there that for some people, the ketogenic works by changing the gut flora, what we have. So the microbiota might change, and that might explain why some people have such a good response. But again, we don't know who they're going to be. We need to understand this more. We need to have larger cohorts with proper trials, properly controlled to understand this. But it's give hope that we will understand better things in the future. We also now starting to understand, and this is actually old data. For instance, this is from 97. That's very common in the research world. We have some evidence we cannot understand. And then it takes, 20 years for this to come into line. For instance, there were loads of indicators that people with epilepsy were more prone to have other disease, but we didn't interpret what we were getting in the research until more recently. This is an example where there was evidence that the bacteria in the guts could change the metabolism of drugs. And this is another area where we need to start. So the way the drugs are absorbed or how they metabolize, they might be a resultant of the genetic makeup of the person, but also the other environmental things like the bacteria in our guts. So this is another area that needs studies. And I have heard this so many times. This drug causes this because as soon as I have it, it causes constipation and my seizures get worse. And if I'm off this drug, things are better. So I think that there is some traction here, and we need to be looking at this more carefully. However, I think that the emphasis here is that we have so many open questions. And this will be probably the next 5-10 years of research before, we will have the ways to do it. Is this something that will work for everyone? Probably not. There might be some specific type of epileptic syndromes. They might have some genetic makeups. There might be something that will be driving this. We need to look at how this would provide an alternative treatment and who are the people that will be helped. And I think that should we use, for instance, antibiotics in the future for some forms of epilepsy? That might be an option, but we need to fully understand what these antibiotics will do and any interaction they can cause. And so there are loads of questions, but this opens a new avenue for us to think about forms of treatment. As we heard this morning already, 1/3 of people with epilepsy do not respond to the drugs we have at the moment, and their life is blighted by the seizures. So this could be an avenue for some people, hopefully more than just some. So we are looking forward to this. Now, moving to artificial intelligence, I think it's a very important thing because using mathematics to look for patterns might give us ways to explore things that could be helpful in the way we treat or the way we investigate, the way we diagnose. And artificial intelligence is basically a machine that will use computer being told by humans what is what. So it learns. It will start doing some reasoning because if this is this, this could be that. and eventually it could self-correct for errors. So this has been used more and more in medicine. We all might have heard what DeepMind, part of Google, that has brought some ways that you can predict kidney damage earlier than humans, the doctors could do, just by looking at patterns and blood screen data. There is other ways that artificial intelligence can read scans, either MRI, better after being told how to do it over time, they can learn. And this is starting to be applied to epilepsy. This is just some examples on the day-to-day life that we have with machine learning. For instance, facial recognition, which, we go when we get to the airport and we put our passport in, it will recognize us and let us through without seeing an immigration officer. But it's also often used for sending you the right ad. If you're interested in, let's say, coffee, you might get a lot of coffees adverts through your email. And it's also been given a bad name because it was used for political campaigning in the US and maybe in Europe and probably in the UK in some to actually send right messages for potential voters for some causes. So artificial intelligence and machine learning is around, it's not going to go away, and this is something that we can harvest to improve the life of people. And in epilepsy, for instance, there are some ways that we can use logarithms that are based in machine learning to detect seizures. So seizure detection, they are nowadays quite well advanced. We can actually predict, we can actually pick up a seizure. We cannot predict when it will happen, but that would be the next development. This is really moving towards being able to anticipate a seizure. And this might make a difference. If we cannot stop the seizures to start, if we could predict when they can work, we can work in improving safety around the person. We could summon someone to be with the person when they have a seizure. So very briefly take over. This is, for instance, using videos to detect neonatal seizures, to actually differentiate if a little baby, a just born baby, can actually, what is happening to the baby is actually an epileptic seizure. This is using what you get in the video. And then our collaborating group in the Netherlands is quite advanced in actually recognizing convulsive seizures, looking at videos. It will go through a video, and it will be able to tell you what type of seizure that happens. And this is quite well advanced. We have, for instance, the detection, as I mentioned. You have a wearable EMG device, or you're having some impedance device, and you can then detect the seizures. Because the algorithm that is built into this machine knows what happens at the time, and will say, there's a 95% chance that this is actually a convulsive seizure, and then it can summon help, can do something. And I think that if we do this, what would be the major aim is really to get people help and attention and put them, get safety around them. But it's also important that it will give us data on seizure happening, because we know that when people are alone, when there's not someone there, seizures are underreported. People tend to have more seizures, and this is work that has been done in telemetry units where people having video, and then we know what happened. Almost half of the time in some studies, the seizures were not known to the person having them. So I think that that would be a very interesting way of recording the number of seizures someone have. Yeah. We have just some different wearable devices that could actually help us. We are going to go into imaging, getting machine to actually help us to find what is in the MRI. And there is a whole array of studies that are bringing out preliminary data that will do it for us. And, no doubts that this will help making decisions. If we have the right, we have certainty about something. There are limitations at this moment, and we need to put much more work into it. And for instance, we will need much, much more studies. There needs to be much more cohorts with where we know what's happening so we can tell the machine what is what. Just moving to precision medicine. This is when we're going to use the genetic makeup of a person rather than what happened on the EEG or what we heard from the story to improve the ways we're going to, and then we can have all sorts of ways to improve the treatment. And gene therapy, for instance, this has been considered and been assessed for some forms of focal epilepsy, very early days. It works in some models, but we need to really put this. But before we get there, we will need a lot of input from the geneticists to actually tell us what's going on. There is precision surgery coming on board, where, for instance, this COLIT, which is laser interstitial thermal therapy, we can actually learn where it's more likely and then introduce something to deliver local laser therapy. And this has been developed in the US and it's coming to the UK soon, so we're going to be seeing more of this. So just to finalize, I know that my time is coming to an end. I just want to mention a few things about new drugs. There's a lot of frustration and people are, to say, disappointed that NICE has recently not recommended CBD. But I think that we need to understand that at the moment there's no evidence that CBD works in the way that some people believe, and this has been fed by social media. We don't have long-term data of what this could cause in a person. And although you could argue that it's natural, if you want to actually get the 1,200 milligrams of CBD that is supposed to be in a tablet, you would have to eat about 50 to 60 trees to get the same thing. So it's not really natural. Also, I need to remind you that a lot of the poisons we use, they actually come from plants. And curare, for instance, foxgloves can give you a very nice poison. So not everything natural means that they are devoid of problems. And we need to fully understand this. So I think that at this time, NICE made the right decision, saying we need to understand this better. We need to have more data in the long term. And more importantly, they need to understand how the price that it came up has been arrived. Because it might be because they need so many plants, but that's something else. Cerobamate is an interesting drug. It actually jumped some of the trials because it was so fantastic in one trial, phase 2 trial, because it had more people seizure-free than any other trial since levetiracetam. So this is now very advanced, and we might see it in the next 2 years. Then is fenfluramine, which in some studies look better than CBD for Dravet, but we hardly talk about it. And I think that this is, maybe social media hasn't picked up. They have really gone on with CBD. But fenfluramine is an interesting drug. It has some concerns, but has better results in Dravet than the CBD. And the last drug I want to mention that is sort of advanced, we probably have it in the tunnel, is paxavonil. This drug also looks very good in terms of decreasing seizures for people that have tried it. But there is a concern about the fact that it actually may have some toxic effect because in an animal model, in dogs, it causes a form of muscle problems. So we need to look at this. And I know that I'm getting to my time. It's just to say that we're getting to a new era of research. We're going into new ways to look at this. Genomic is really driving a lot of the developments and will fit into other things, for instance, what I spoke today, to help with the diagnosis, to help with predict prognosis, and help target to get the precise medicine for each individual, rather than the shooting in the dark that we do nowadays. There has been progress, but no doubts, there still needs to be done. Much more needs to be done. And I cut here before I get a red flag. Thank you very much.